Good morning. It is March 16th, and today you should be getting this by subscription if you want. So welcome to it. If you've subscribed, we're happy to have you, and we'll enjoy the time together. So our daily dose of good news for today is from Numbers. It is chapter 20, verses 1 through 13, and I'd like you to listen really closely today for what does God tell Moses to do? And what does Moses do? Are they the same? Are they different? The Israelites, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and against Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we have died when our kindred died before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? Why have you brought us out of Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and command the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock for them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock." So Moses took the staff from before the Lord, as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" And then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I've given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and by which he showed his holiness." Here ends the reading. And I will admit, I've read this a few times, but in one of the times of reading this, it reminded me of being the parent of teenagers, that they're griping and grumbling and complaining, and basically Moses and Aaron take a time out to keep their cool and go pray to God. I can't tell you how many times my kids have argued with me, and their logic may make total sense. There's no figs here. There's no water here. Why are we doing this? And I hear the logic still makes me mad. And I may need a minute, so I'll go off in my room and pray or whatever. So it made me giggle a little bit that I can relate to that. But if you notice, if you listen carefully and read it closely, Moses doesn't do what God said. And in some ways you can kind of think, well, big deal. The water came out of the rock. The people were nourished. Isn't all's well that ends well? Maybe, doesn't matter. Is it relevant that, God told Moses, command the rock to give its water. And Moses struck the rock a couple times with the staff and called them rebels. I think it does matter. And in looking at this text, I was a little curious about Moses, and we read sometimes some stories about the people grumbling against him. And I backtracked through a few chapters, and, there's chapters in 18, for example, where God's calling the people rebels, that God's saying, oh, they're rebels. So it's not that this word rebels is an uncommon word for thinking about the Israelites. But at this point in our text, God's not calling them rebels. I think God gets it. God's yeah, there's not figs here. There's not water here. It's a problem. We need to handle that. But God's not accusing them in that. God's not calling them rebels, but Moses does. And I think, again, like a parent who's had their buttons pushed, Moses is tired of them griping at him. Moses is sick of it, all right? And so Moses is mad, and Moses is lashing out, kind of like a mad parent of, you rebels, you guys are killing me, and I don't like how you're acting. And so what Moses says, if you listen closely, is specifically, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? Okay, who's the credit going to there? Is it going to God? No. It's going to Moses and Aaron. Moses is saying, we'll fix it, Aaron and I'll fix it, and he bangs on the rock. That's really different in showing the holiness of God than commanding the rock in God's name to yield water, not even touching the rock, and the water suddenly spurting out from the rock because of that rock being commanded by God to yield its water. So Moses shifts the focus to himself and Aaron as being the ones who are going to save and provide and take care of them. Maybe because Moses feels a little defensive. I don't know. But he doesn't follow the instructions of the Lord. And the Lord's instructions are about glorifying God. Even in the midst of this time that the Israelites don't like, we're still going to glorify God in it. And Moses doesn't do that. Moses glorifies himself and Aaron. And so that's why God's punishment is a rough one. Can you imagine Moses with the people wandering around in the desert for year after year after year, and then he's not going to get credit for taking them into the promised land that God says, you're going to die out here. You're not taking credit again. It's me. I'm the one saving them. I'm the one whose name will be glorified. So it's an appropriate consequence, again, like you try to give teenagers or kids, right, is a consequence that fits what the problem is. The problem is Moses taking credit as if Moses is able to save when only God is able to save. So you could look at this two ways. You could look at it as God's going to be punitive if you don't follow the instructions exactly. That's one way you could look at it. But that's not necessarily good news, I don't think. Because I think it feels like God is harsh or vindictive. Or you could look at it that the emphasis is to glorify God. And that God does listen, and that God does have empathy for God's people. And that God will hear and not chastise them for being rebels, but say, okay, I'll help you, and want to do that. And that God's in all of our situations, no matter how rough, no matter how parched we feel, that God is there hearing us and wants to take care of us. And God wants us to know that God's doing it, that God is helpful in our lives, and that God can be glorified by us always as a God of love and provision. And that's the good news for today. You have a God of love and provision who deserves to be glorified. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.